Hey everybody, we're working on the 200 some more today. Last time we got it to do this. Whoa! But it also did a bunch of this. Oh, a little bit of breakup there. So if you've been following along this project from the beginning, this car was grounded mostly, from what we can tell, from ignition issues. Here's the very quick rundown of everything that went wrong there. The ECU was fried. It fried both coils. It had the incorrect coil installed in a different position. The spark plug wires were in terrible condition, and it needed all 8 spark plugs. So we have replaced every single component and upgraded every single component of the ignition system. So this car features a unique, bizarre, and unnecessary twin spark plug system. And the way that it works, that we understand anyway, is that the intake side works all of the time. So startup, driving around, full boost, everything. The exhaust side only works up until the point at which you give it full beans. So when you get into boost or you get into high load percentages is how it's going to calculate that, however it does it, then it will shut off the exhaust side. Why it does that, I don't fully understand, nor do I care to. So either we've got an issue where the coil itself has gone bad, something is going weird with the intake side, so that whenever we lose the exhaust side and it's relying just on the intake side, it's acting like it's got spark cut, it's acting like it can't make any power. So we're gonna start simple. So I put a set of plug wires on it already. They were $8. They were in the clearance section on Rock Auto. This is not one of those things you should really cheap out on, but they actually looked really good. And when I was putting them on, I was like, yeah, these seem pretty good. But recall 2 things. Number 1, I tried to remove the exhaust side number 4 plug wire just to check it, and the whole thing just fell apart. Number 2, when we were checking for vacuum leaks originally, I was using the classic tried and true carb cleaner technique where you just spray some flammable liquid around and see if you can get the engine to rev up. Engine did not rev up. It, however, did. Oh, frick. And there's really no good reason for that to have had happened. Either somehow the intake manifold was hot enough that it hit flashpoint, which is super unlikely, or we had a big spark that ignited it. And what could provide a big spark? Bad spark plug wires. So hopefully these are good spark plug wires. I have always trusted NGK for everything that they make. I've had nothing but good luck with them. The only thing I don't really love about their wires is the color that they make them in. I think NGK reds exist, which I would have gotten, but they were not available. But this blue color that is their standard is frankly hideous to me. But these are very, very well constructed spark plug wires, and I have nothing but confidence in these. Another cool thing is that they actually label them as to which cylinder they go to, and it even labels if it's exhaust or intake side. So that's really cool and that's really handy. So you can see on the set that we put on there, they all have these 90-degree bends, and it just gets really crowded. They should all be this, that straight-on connector there, and that's what these NGKs have. So let's give it a try, and we'll see if it runs any better with the new plug wires on there. I'm also going to go ahead and take out this fuel pressure gauge because there's no reason to have it in there anymore. And it's not really meant to be used for long periods of time. All right, with all those out of there, you might be thinking, Cone, you fool, you didn't mark where those went. The distributor cap is thankfully labeled as to where they all go. Oh my gosh, they even bundled them. They even bundled them as to which is intake and which is exhaust. NGK, you just never cease to amaze me. We'll do exhaust first. Okay, man, I can't even tell you how much nicer these NGK wires are. Like, I'm not sponsored, but my email is open. Seriously, just spend a little bit more money on a nicer set of plug wires. The NGKs have never let me down. Well, I guess we're about to see. But even if it doesn't fix our issue, they're just so much nicer. They're so much nicer to deal with. It's absolutely worth the money. All right, I got a little bit of wiring harness shenanigans over here to deal with. I feel like you might think that the exhaust spark plugs are weird. Like, that's the weird part. But really, most single overhead cam engines that I deal with, that's where they put the spark plugs. You know why? Probably not, but you know why? Because it's easy over there. Having them on the intake side with all the EFI stuff and the throttle body, not good. Not good. And of course, this is the default side. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Let's plug it in and see if it fires up and see how badly I messed up the firing order. Even though it's pretty foolproof, I'm a pretty big fool. Oh my gosh, I actually did it. Well, I did it correct for at least one set anyway. Now, it would be a misfiring mess if one side was messed up. I'm gonna let it warm up a bit, get it outside, and test it. I just want to idle down today. I guess it idled down when it came off of cold idle. And then as soon as I was backing it up, it came off of cold idle and is up at like 1500. Not sure what's up with that. Might have unplugged the sensor or something. Oh, there it was again. Well, at least now we know. Like I said, I wasn't convinced that was going to fix it, but I was curious. Well, we roll back into the garage, which is always at least a mild success, right? If you can drive back into the garage. I think my can of whatever just rolled out, but yep. I guess that's where I'm parking. Let me open the hood actually and just see maybe there's something obvious. Ah, no TPS. We're gonna have to go back out. We might have to go back out. Now I'd better idle down. Yeah. Now I don't think that was our issue, but no TPS would be confusing for it. It must have come disconnected like as I was driving too, because it was idled right, and then it wasn't. Yep, fooled me again. I was like, oh, there it goes, but it said no. Can't say. Yeah, it's funny because it's like it almost just seems like no matter what, if you tip the throttle in, so it's certainly low. The only reason I don't think, or I wouldn't suggest it being a fuel issue, is that it's not trying to run hot. Usually if you're leaning out an engine, especially a boosted engine, if it's woo, that suspension sucked. If it's running out of fuel, it's going to run super lean, it's going to try to run really hot, and it's not doing that. Doesn't necessarily count it out, but it's a hint, it's a clue. A blues clue. Hey, just in case you fix it, I need you to be documented as like you were here.
Okay.
And you fixed it, okay?
Okay.
And what, like...
Why do they allow this to be hung in such a way?
Bro, it has a hanger? I had no idea that had a hanger on it until this moment.
Oh.
Well, it's good to know it's worthless, but...
I mean, it'll hang, but like...
Yeah, I need it to be pointed at me. Okay, first off, I'm not a Harbor Freight fan, okay? But like, that exact thing, how much was it at O'Reilly's? 50?
It was... Wasn't it like $30? They wanted like 20...
I thought it was like between 15 and 18. Still.
It
was literally $3 at Harbor Freight.
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy.
Same with all these other things, basically.
And we're finishing the other coil that's still grossly bladed in, so that we can switch them and see if that does anything. Say you're sorry.
I'm sorry.
I just was bragging about these wires and how happy I am, and kids these days. All right, well, while ZK was here, we learned some stuff, I guess. What does it mean? We don't know. But basically, I've now gotten to the point of making a list to go through to try and diagnose what the deal is here. So, other than cutting one of the spark plug wires, we definitely were getting some variance between it running on one coil versus the other and switching the coils back and forth. They're now completely wired similarly so that I can switch them back and forth if I need to, and we might get that far down on the list. But before we get there, I want to verify the fuel pressure one more time. I know it seems like we've done it a lot, but I want to do it in a way that I can see how it's reacting under load, because the only time I've ever been able to check is while it's just sitting here static, and it doesn't misfire when it's just sitting here static, it needs a load on it. In order to do that, I need to fix the new boost leak that we have, because during our first test drives, the boost gauge was going straight to 5, and it would cut out, and it was very consistent. It would go to the negative side of the gauge, and then it would go to full positive side of the gauge. It is no longer doing that. There was an incident that I really wish was on camera, but it wasn't, where ZK was, I don't honestly know. I think he was just trying to see if it was running right or not. He was manually manipulating the throttle, and being ZK, he went wide open throttle because that's necessary, and then snapped it back. And when he snapped it back, the cable wrapped around itself, and the engine started revving itself uncontrollably while it was misfiring and backfiring. And the theory is that during that event, probably loosened that connection down to the turbo for that main charge pipe is awful. So I'm probably going to take that apart first and try to get a better seal on that. Whether I have to weld it up some, I don't know. We'll look at it. But we need to have a consistent 5 psi on that, or our testing is irrelevant. So once we have verified that it has fuel pressure under load and we're getting a consistent 5 psi while it's running, then we can move on to diagnosing the ignition system. And that's where this is going to get very methodical, and we're going to really try to take this bit by bit to understand what's going on. We're going to start by inspecting the intake side spark plugs. It's the last part of the intake side ignition system that hasn't been visually inspected since this problem has arisen. We don't know for sure this problem hasn't always been there, but we still need to inspect just to make sure that the spark plugs weren't damaged somehow. We need to run it on the intake coil only and see how it runs on that. Does it still have the same exact symptoms? Then run it on the exhaust coil only. Obviously, it should cut out at whatever boost level or whatever load level, and then return once you back off the throttle. We need to switch the exhaust and intake coil plugs. So basically, we're going to power the exhaust with the intake coil and power the intake with the exhaust coil, and see if that makes any changes. If we still haven't figured out anything there, we're going to try and change the signaling. So we're going to signal the intake coil with the exhaust signal, meaning coming from the ECU, and then the inverse. Signal the exhaust side with the intake, so that we can try to pinpoint where the failure is. Before I do any of that, though, it's time to get serious. Because obviously we're not serious enough yet. I need to move the cars back to the correct bays. So currently red is in the good bay with the good lighting, and this has been on the side. So let's get red over here, and Wally over there, which means getting the ramp truck out of the way, which means... Okay, now we're on the right side of the garage. We've got light. It's time to start tackling our self-imposed list. So, first thing on the list was fuel pressure. We can't check the fuel pressure under load until we have load, and I can tell just by moving it over here, we definitely have a significant vacuum leak somewhere. I'm guessing it's in this red, what I call charge pipe. It is directly out of the turbo, directly into the intake manifold. Factory has O-ring connectors. We've been over that in the past. It's just got little couplers on it now, but I don't think they're working currently. This may raise the question, Cone, shouldn't you smoke test it right now? Maybe, possibly, but this is such a glaringly obvious fault point that I want to check it first just by fixing it rather than diagnosing it, which is backwards from probably how it should be done, but it's just how it works in my brain right now, okay? It's also kind of easier to deal with taking this on and off currently than it is dealing with setting up the smoke machine. Is that a fault of my smoke machine setup? Yes, it is. Am I going to do anything about it right now? No, I'm not. So this is the part that I think causes us grief. This typically was a little bit longer from the factory, and it had an O-ring that went around it. The little cuts in it, I don't actually know if that's factory or not, but I do know that this is metal, and one of the things I'm really considering doing is either cutting this off right here and trying to weld on a new piece that better fits the turbo, or I guess trying to weld these gaps up. I don't think that's going to go very well for me. I just don't. So for the moment, maybe let's just look at our options and see if we can get a better seal around this with our coupling. Thankfully, the other side is smooth, so this side doesn't have that problem. It's only this side. Yeah. So the turbo side is really nice because the turbo has a bead around it, and you can see how well that seats in here. You can see that it leaves a nice imprinted bead in there, versus this side, you can probably tell it's just a mess. Oh, in fact, it cut it. Well, there's the end of our diagnosis for today. Yep. All right. Well, okay. Well, there's today's progress gone. Well, at least we found something. Well, it's a new day. We got new parts. Let's find new problems. So previously we got to the point of trying to diagnose some stuff here, and in that discovered that we had punctured a hole through the connector down there on the charge pipe down to the turbo. I've ordered the same exact one I used before, which might seem foolish, but I don't think it was a fault of the part. It was a fault of, as we were probably fiddling around, we moved it down into contact with the turbo, it melted it, and there you go. So first thing we got to do today is let's just go ahead and take that charge pipe back off. I put it on because I had to get the sob in here for work, and now we'll take it off, and I think I'm going to do something that's going to lift the curse of this vehicle. I really do think that this is the solution of all solutions. Is it you? Are you the solution of all solutions? All right, it's no fancy paint job, but it will do, and hopefully it will lift the curse. The curse! I went ahead and put the bottom connector on there, and I did it in a way that I would drop the other half of it down. Basically what I did is I set it on the turbo. Here, let me show you. So I went ahead and focus on the thing I would like. Yeah. So I went ahead and stuck it on the turbo side so that it would have clearance, and that way, when I go to put this side on, I know that it's clear on the turbo side. And I was doing it the opposite way before because I was worried about it coming loose from there, and I'm less worried about it coming loose from there and more worried about it melting. Could you guys pipe down over here? What is going on? Right, so let's get this side on. This is a connector that was on the car before. I don't know what this side of the connector is actually supposed to look like. If this is this factory style, I assume it is. But this seems to be made of the right stuff versus what's on the bottom side of it. maybe let's try this side first. And how's our angle on the dangle down here? Angle on the dangle looks pretty good. Maybe out a bit. I'll try to get this one, right on where it bulges out smooth so that it doesn't have to try to grip where the openings are. I almost certainly will be revisiting this. I would really like to get a piece made for this that fits without the O-ringed connector at all. Unfortunately, I don't do the TIG welding and pipe bending kind of stuff, so I gotta either have someone fabricate me one or find an aftermarket solution, which as far as I can tell doesn't exist. It probably existed at some point in time, when these cars were kind of more commonplace, but these things are so forgotten about now, and like anybody that works on them changes this engine to something else, so you just can't find the aftermarket parts for this stuff anymore. And that's a question that I hear often is why go through all this trouble trying to get this engine to work? People don't even like it. It doesn't make a lot of power. And the answer is it's just kind of a personal goal of mine. I want to experience this car as it was intended to be, or at least as close to that as possible, and then go from there. And I have a faster S chassis already. I don't need two. I just want to, I don't know, have a nostalgia experience. But at what cost? All right, it's starting to get tight. I'm going to try to use my electric ratchet to make sure that gets super snug. It feels good to me. Plenty of clearance. I guess we'll just try it and see how it be. It might need to slide down a little further. It's pretty funky looking right now. All right, let me tighten these. Okay, well, it looks a lot better even though I scratched it. I can touch that up. I guess there's only one thing to do. That's to start it up and see if we're getting a good vacuum and a steady idle. Okay, great news. We've got a perfect vacuum. Like literally perfect.
Key is in the ignition.
You don't say. So that's good. Very, very good news. So now I'll put that fuel pressure gauge in there and I'll set up my camera, do a little drive, see if we have good fuel pressure. And that's the first thing off of our list. All right, here's our setup. I think this might get pushed down a bit, but it should be wide enough to have a view. We'll see. Is it going to fall off? Maybe. I don't think so, though. Well, let me start it up and make sure I've got fuel pressure to begin with and it's not leaking. Perfect. All right. I guess I'm just going to go for the shortest drive possible. All right, well, that takes that off the list. 50 PSI on boost, which is better than it really even needs to be. I believe it was 30 to 40 is the range, or maybe it was 40 to 50. Either way, it's got great fuel pressure, and there's no fuel pressure drop when it is cutting out. And that's quite possibly the worst it's run, period. Like, it was really bad, to the point that I need to go over things and make sure that we don't have some kind of outrageous leak somewhere. All right, so we've verified the fuel pressure. We need to verify the boost. I haven't been able to do that because it's not running well enough. I have not really gotten it to build any boost. So I started looking at the rest of my list. We need to inspect the intake spark plugs. I'm gonna run it on exhaust coil only for a second because that's really easy to do now. And I just want you to observe. So, sorry, intake coil only. So this is intake only. So we're certainly at least down a cylinder, if not multiple, when running just on the intake side. If we run on just the exhaust side, it does dip down a little, but it doesn't miss. I'm gonna take it out on the street, see if we can verify that it has boost at all. Well, I don't know. It's just really hard to tell. Currently, it's still doing this. Like anytime I try to lean into it, it cuts out. It seems like maybe the boost gauge is not currently working at all, because it's not showing vacuum either when I get it to idle. It's just not moving. So we could have two issues there. Well, it was easy to find our culprit for why the boost gauge isn't working and why we're getting this weird vacuum leak. These hoses are the bane of my existence. These all work off of this vacuum pump over here. They're very small. I can't find this at the parts store. I guess I'm just going to have to try to special order some. I'll get a diameter on it. But yeah, they keep splitting and giving me all sorts of headache and whatnot over here. I'm sure this is not focusing great, but in theory you could see it. All right, so next up on the list, let's inspect some spark plugs. Let's go ahead and see what number 2 is doing, because it's the one that's easy to get. And then we'll remember that it's the big size socket, not the small size. I feel like it is the small size. I feel like it is. Maybe I'm just not getting down in there at the right angle on the dangle. It's possible. That's what it was. Okay. No, still nothing. Hello? Oh my God. What is that? What is that? What am I simply can't even describe it to you. So there's your reason why I couldn't get a socket on there. What is that though? And how am I going to get it out of there? I got to get it all out before I dare pull that spark plug out. I swear if that's more nuts. I swear. So, I can confirm there was indeed more nuts in there. The part that just boggles my mind is that I already did this. Like, I already vacuumed all of these out the first time I put plugs on here. So, where did all of that come from? Like, is there still a creature living in this thing? I don't know. Was all that crap down there blocking the spark plug wire from seating? Possibly. I doubt it, though, because it was below the head of the bolt, or the head of the nut on there. That is an interesting looking spark plug, I gotta say. Yeah, so it's worth noting this has very few miles on it, but we've got like one side of it that looks very clean, and one side looks dirty. So is it that the other side, like the other spark plug, is firing and cleaning off this side of the spark plug? At first I thought it was super lean, but no, it's just clean. All right, well, I went ahead and vacuumed out the spark plug hole before I put this back in, just to make sure it's getting like seated down properly. We would hear exhaust or compression gases escaping if it actually wasn't seated, but I just wanted to make sure we weren't having that issue. Got it, and I got my rubber gasket. Okay, well, I suppose while we're here, we're going to go ahead and take a look at number 1. Very little schmoo on this one. I'll still vacuum it out. Number 1, I believe I've checked previously. It doesn't hurt to check now. I'd like to see if we have that clean spot again. No, this one's very even. I'm seeing some brown there. Brown usually means lean. All right, make the noise, please. Make the noise. Yeah, there it goes. All right, see, that's a good spark plug wire. I'm tempted now to just run it again and try each coil and see if it's still misfiring. If it's not, I'm going to lose my shit. Okay, so let's disconnect exhaust coil. It still sounds worse. Like intermittently stuttering. Definitely intermittent stutter there. Exhaust only. Yeah, it goes down, but do we get the stutter? Not as far as I can tell. It wavers, which is interesting in its own right. Okay, that's both on. Intake only. I would say certainly runs better on the exhaust side than the intake side. And it's not a dead miss or anything. Maybe we got a bad intake coil. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm actually going to switch these two. So I'm going to power the exhaust coil, or signal, sorry, the exhaust coil with the intake signal, and vice versa. So pink is exhaust, blue. So currently I'm signaling the exhaust side with the intake signal from the ECU. Intake signaling the exhaust. So we're going to signal, or we're going to exhaust signal the intake. All right, so we're currently running on just the intake spark plugs, right? No, incorrect. We are currently running on the exhaust spark plugs signaled by the computer on the intake side. So it's getting intake side signal to the exhaust side coil, and it's running smooth. That seems fine to me. So now what we want is to power the intake coil with the exhaust signal. Like crap. That's awful. So it runs like dog doo-doo running on the intake coil. I wonder if we fried the intake coil. So it's not a signaling issue. That's good. So now what I'm tempted to try is running the engine from the intake signal to the exhaust coil. No. What I want to do is run it, so I want the exhaust side coil to stay alive. So I want the exhaust side coil to be signaled by the intake side. Yes. Okay, so the exhaust side coil, that's how we had it just a second ago. All right, how am I going to do this? So I'm signaling intake to the exhaust coil. Intake coil is getting nothing. I won't have a tach. That's fine. But the ECU is going to be thinking it's hooked up to the intake coil, but it's actually hooked up to the exhaust coil. And then we're going to see if it makes boost. Okay. It's definitely got some stumbliness to it. Just doing like a high-ish RPM coast. Yeah, it kind of just feels like it's a little lazy, which might be that it's running on those exhaust side spark plugs, which I don't think, well, they're the wrong-ish heat range. They're very high heat range versus the intake. It's also, you know, in my opinion, it's tuned to run on all of them, not on 4 of them. But we need to find out if it actually makes power without cutting out. I think there's your answer. Alright, let's turn around before we get too carried away here. It's the best it's ever been. Hands down, best it's ever been. It's a little hard to drive with no tach. listening to the engine, it sounds lean to me. The spark plug certainly looked a little lean to me. It sounds a little lean. That can be just a product of it being a little too advanced in timing. In a respectable 3.5 minutes. Certainly has some laziness in it, but boy is it better. So I guess we're gonna buy another intake coil and see if maybe we just cooked it. So you hear it there? Like kind of just fall on space a little. I've also got to get used to the fact that it's a very old turbo engine. It doesn't make a lot of power down low, and by not a lot of power, I mean no power down low. So even in first, you gotta wind it out a little before you mat the gas. It's running great though, cool, good oil pressure, good vacuum. Boost comes right up. Perfectly drivable. So I guess now we got to get the rear end to not sound like a pack of hyenas. Get the exhaust fixed, and then figure out why the intake side coil isn't working. Or in some order of that.